Madden Benz Unfiltered, a few days removed from the horror show that was Steelers and Patriots on Thursday night, the worst 5-day stretch in franchise history, given their losses against the Cardinals and Pats back-to-back against two-win teams at Acrisure Stadium. Yet, strangely, Mark, here we are, we're waking up on Monday morning, and the Steelers are almost in exactly the same playoff position that they were once in. They dropped one spot, just one spot, after those two losses, all things considered. Although I feel strange even talking about the Steelers in the framework of the playoffs, given everything they've given to us to talk about over these past two games.
Well, the funny part is if they do win at Indianapolis, which I doubt that they could, then people will start letting their optimism spring back to life about how this team can beat anybody. And it's about peaking at the right time and blah, 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 which, of course, is the worst thing that can happen after the season. For the offseason, because then there won't be any urgency projected by the fans to the team to make radical changes. The worst thing that can happen to this team would be to make the playoffs.
I wouldn't consider firing a coach who has not won a playoff game for 7 years, if that's how this goes down, as being radical. I wouldn't consider firing a coach who has then failed to win a playoff game in 13 of 17 years as radical. But
radical by the standard of the team, Tim. And
right.
Certainly
yes.
You don't see coaches get fired after they make the playoffs. That very rarely happens.
But, again, I heard it moments before we started our stream today here on Madden Benz Unfiltered. Jason Lockenfora was on with the other sports station in town, and he was talking about people in Pittsburgh. You don't have a birthright to be in the playoffs every year. Well, no, you don't. But I also don't think that asking for one playoff win over a 7-year stretch is leaning on a birthright.
Well, and most coaches who don't get a playoff win in 7 years do get fired. Was Lockenfora making a case for keeping Tomlin in perpetuity?
Basically, yes. That's the way I interpreted it.
Well, that's what the national media thinks should happen. And there's an agenda there that is obvious, so we have no need to say it.
It's also obvious that I think the Rooneys are kind of trying to serve their own agenda. They love this "we are the beacons of stability" thing that they've put together.
Yeah. You look at this team, Tim. Does it seem at all stable to you?
That's the funny part.
It doesn't seem at all stable to me.
And that's going back to the Brown, Bell, Ben era. That goes back to 2014 through 2018, where, this team that prides itself on stability, that was a team chock full of different off-the-field headlines every week.
It goes back to ever since Tomlin lost Cowher's leaders. I used to be one who didn't discredit Tomlin for winning a Super Bowl with Cowher's players. But in retrospect, as we get further and further away, that's exactly what he did. He won with Tomlin's players. He won with Tomlin's leaders. He won with Tomlin's culture. And when all those things flipped over to him, the Steelers ain't been worth a damn since.
So do they beat the Colts?
I don't know. Who knows? I wouldn't watch them. I didn't have to.
I'm at the point now where I just kind of expect the opposite to happen. I think everything is Costanza and Seinfeld. It's opposite day. I mean, like this team has kind of gone down that path where they had the two easiest games of the schedule and they barfed them up. And I just feel like, as we often talk about with Tomlin, this will bait the narrative even more. Oh, this is when Tomlin does his best work. When it gets hardest, this is when Tomlin does his best work. And you got the Colts coming up, and you got the Bengals after that. They win those two games, even split them. They're not in bad shape.
Yeah, but are they going to reverse the way they play overnight? If they play the way they played against Arizona and New England, they're going to get killed by everybody remaining on their schedule, because every team they play is better than those two teams. But like you said, they have been an up-and-down team in terms of performance. I just think their quarterback play is hit rock bottom.
Well, yeah,
whether
let's get
it's
to that
Pickett
next.
or Trubisky. Look at Flacco. Look at Flacco coming off his couch. Has been appreciably better for the Cleveland Browns since joining them than any Steeler quarterback in recent memory.
And, Mark, if you think about it, Ben Roethlisberger's been gone for 23 months, and they're already 0 for 3 in trying to replace him. Rudolph wasn't going to be good enough. Trubisky was the first plan. Then they decided to draft somebody else on top of getting Trubisky, and all three of them might not be good enough.
You know another mistake they made, Tim? It's a mistake that Mike Tomlin has control over personnel. But Omar Khan as the GM was a bad move. Now, how much control he has as opposed to Tomlin, I do not know. But they made a Bean Connor the GM. And they did it because he had been there. And once again, stability, stability, stability.
I feel like on the outside, that almost pushes the chips into the middle all the more for the talking point that Tomlin has absolved the blame, because they'll focus on something like that nationally. They'll find anything to draw a line between Tomlin and roster building until the roster proves to be good again. Like I've always said, Mark, imagine waking up on, the day that they make the Super Bowl and Tomlin's still in charge and writing a column that he had nothing to do with the roster construction. You'd be excoriated for it. But when it's bad, it's automatically given to Tomlin as an out as to why they're not good.
Everything the good that happens with the Steelers is Tomlin's doing. Everything bad that happens with the Steelers is somebody else's fault. At least that's the national perspective. I feel like locally, even the citizens are starting to catch on.
Well, Mark, you brought up the Flacco comp. There's Browning in Cincinnati, too. He's been good for a couple weeks now. You look at some of the other games across the National Football League yesterday, and you wonder, there's no way they could ever hang with a Philadelphia. There's no way they could ever hang with a Dallas. I know it was low scoring in Kansas City and Buffalo, but it wouldn't be low scoring if their defense was against one of those two teams' offenses.
Yeah, I look around the league, and there aren't many good teams. That's the one thing that has held the Steelers in there, Tim, that there aren't many good teams. What? The Steelers are 7-6. I think there's is it 5 or 6 other AFC teams?
They're one of 6 in the AFC that are 7-6.
Unbelievable, right? And that's what's holding them in there.
Yeah, they're like a lot of other teams, which once again highlights the point that the Steelers just aren't special anymore. And that's the biggest thing. We always hold the Steelers up to this higher level of being a special organization. There's nothing special about being exactly where the league builds itself to be and you being the personification of it.
All they had to do was beat a couple of 2-win teams, and they would be locked in the playoffs. Heck, all they really had to do was split those games, and they would be a really good bet to make the playoffs.
I already saw one come in here, and I'm just going to jump to it because I was going to get away from the Tomlin stuff and the Steelers for a second. But Jet fan here in New York, ready to hire Tomlin if he becomes available. That's not the point. And yeah, I get it. As everybody nationally points out, he'd have a job in 10 minutes after he was let go. Of course he would, because you can't just hire everybody else's offensive coordinator. Some coaches are going to get second jobs. And you know who else got a second job? Dan Bilesma got a second job. You know who else got a second job? Andy Reid got a second job. It didn't work out for Bilesma when he went to Buffalo. It did work out for Reid, but you know who else it worked out for when Reid left for Kansas City? Philadelphia. Twice. Not with the next coach, but 2 coaches after that, they both went to Super Bowls. It's
Tim,
about
I would drive Mike Tomlin to New York.
What's that?
I would drive Mike Tomlin to New York to take the Jets job.
Because you want to see how it would go down in New York?
He would get excoriated there. That would be a bad situation for him. Although him and Aaron Rodgers, that might be an odd couple type. I mean, it would be just utter, huge mounds of horse manure piling up all over the place. But that would be interesting.
Well, I think he'd cater to the star quarterback just like he did here with Roethlisberger, don't you?
Oh, I think he'd go up there and do more than cater. I think he'd be a bitch.
I want to get to one other football thing, Mark, just because we didn't talk about this in the podcast. But the Kansas City thing last night, the reaction from Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes to that offsides, what'd you think of it?
Couple of big babies. He was offside.
He was way offsides. This wasn't like the field goal thing with the Steelers when Boswell had to make the 61-yarder after they took the 56-yarder off the board. In that case, Siamalu, I don't even think he was offsides, and there was a Jacksonville guy who was more offsides than him. This wasn't that. Kadarius Toney was lined up in a different county.
Yeah, they wanted it to be ignored because you don't see that called all the time. Well, you don't see anybody line up that far offsides all the time either.
Yeah, it was egregious. And what are the refs supposed to do? Go fast forward in time to know what the play is going to look like? They've got to call offsides the moment it happens.
Yeah, well, they're 8-5. They're not what they were expected to be. I'm not sure there's a bit of panic being reflected there, but I'm not sure there's not.
Who do you think is the best team in the AFC? Is it Baltimore or is it Miami?
I don't think, strictly speaking, there is a best team in the AFC. If you made me pick who I think is going to win the division, might be Buffalo. I mean, when the conference go to the Super Bowl, if Buffalo makes the playoffs, they might.
Well, let me rephrase it then. Is anybody in the AFC better than Dallas, Philly, or San Francisco?
I still don't buy into Dallas. I think Philadelphia's just having a midseason hiccup, and they're the best team. San Francisco.
I was going to say, you think they're better than San Francisco?
One or the other.
I kind of lean towards San Francisco right now. I had been on Philly's bandwagon, but you might be right. This might just be a slump. Good teams have them in a parity-filled league.
I think the AFC just stinks. I don't know what's happened to Kansas City, except I think I do know what's happened to Kansas City. They just don't have the weaponry anymore.
Yeah, they have no receivers, and you're building your entire passing tree around a tight end.
Yeah, so I think they're going to have to invest in the offseason, change their team around a bit.
Should the Penguins do the same thing?
In the offseason?
Well, maybe now, maybe midseason. I just don't think they can.
Not now. I wouldn't like at the trade deadline. You got to trade Gensel if they're not in the playoff race, and you got to. And then maybe shop around Karlsson then too. But if you don't make the playoffs 2 straight years, then you got to make a coaching change and no hard feelings. And you got to go to the core 3 and say, hey, we're going to rebuild now. Where's that leave you 3? And then do what they want.
You know, the Karlsson
thing
is
they want in terms of them, not in terms of the team.
The Karlsson thing is kind of interesting, Mark, in the sense that whatever the Penguins got him for and the retention of the contract, if you put the deal as currently constructed out there now for somebody else, and maybe even if the Penguins were to retain some of what remains, all of a sudden he becomes very attractive to a team that is on the rise, that is kind of surprised that they're in the playoff race and needs a guy on the point. He's going to be much more valuable in season once the playoffs roll around than he was off season to even a team like the Penguins.
It's still going to be tough to unload that contract, though. That was obviously a good deal by Dubas just because of who he unloaded. You know, the Granlunds, although Granlund just had
Granlund's having a good year.
Yeah, 2 assists, but that wouldn't have happened here.
Right.
But yeah, I would look to trade Karlsson. I'm not saying he's played bad. He's not had the impact on winning that I had hoped he would.
At this point,
I thought when they got him that there would be any number of games you would look at by now and say, okay, Karlsson won that game. And that's not happened, perhaps because the power play's been so bad.
How much of the power play being bad is on him directly, Karlsson?
I think it's on him for not imposing his will and just taking over and saying this is how the power play needs to be, because he certainly knows better. He has allowed himself, as one of the best power play point men of his generation, to be shoehorned right in the middle of their crap from seasons past.
But how does he control that once the puck is dropped? I mean, I know what you're saying, like in meeting rooms or when they're working on the whiteboard or whatever, but once the puck is dropped, what can he do to help that when so much of
Nothing. I mean, I'm talking about the meeting room. I'm talking about the whiteboard. I'm talking about practice. He needs to say, look, this sucks. Here's what we're doing. He needs to be that definitive because he absolutely knows better. He's the best power play guy they got.
What do they do with rust out, and how do they kind of adjust accordingly?
Probably lose.
Yeah.
I mean, they got this, Tim, how do you pronounce this guy's name? Puljijavari or?
I don't even know how to say it. No, I don't know how to say it either.
I mean, that's a good move, but it's grasping at straws. I don't know what they do, Tim.
Yeah. They're already thin when it comes to forwards being versatile and flexible. There was a top 6 and then there was a bottom 6, and I don't think there's anybody worthy there to be elevated. And once again, we're seeing the residue of not having a farm system worth a crap, because they've always traded draft picks. They've always traded prospects. And at a time when they need cheap productivity like they had in 15 and 16, it is nowhere to be found.
Oh, yeah, that's not Dubas' fault.
No, it's not. I'm saying it's
really not anybody's fault. I didn't mind them trading to try to win more. I wish they would have won a little bit more, but they did win a considerable amount, and they always challenged, and now that's over. Like Lachlan Forrest said regarding the Steelers, we don't have a divine right to the Penguins contending annually either. And they've been real good for real long, and now, splat, that's over.
Last thing on this, Mark, between the two Mikes, Tomlin and Sullivan, you mentioned in the podcast, what do you deem to be the difference between the two when the talk exists of firing the coaches?
Well, I don't make a move with either till season's end. I think Sullivan's the superior coach out of the two. But I think that hockey's a sport where you do hit an expiration date and it's inevitable. So at the end of the year, if they don't make the playoffs, I'd for sure replace him, and I might replace him even if they do. With Tomlin, I just don't think he ever was a good coach. And I think that's evident now. I think he's incompetent. I think he makes bad moves almost on a every game basis. I just think he's got to go. I think he's gone from a guy who can manage somebody else's team and succeed, but the further they get away from that, it's proven he's just not a good coach, never was.
Any opinions on what happened in the NHL with Goodbranson and David Perron? Those.
Oh, by the way, Tim, one last thing about Tomlin is that whenever you hear people say what a great coach he is, nobody can say why, can they?
Well, they can point to the resume in the first 4 years.
Yeah, but in terms of what he does well as a coach, what he hangs his hat on, everybody says he's a great coach just because.
Yeah, they point to intangibles. They point to things like keeping his hand on the rudder, keeping the car in the middle of the lane.
The players just love playing for Coach T.
Even though it's swerved off into the breakdown lane again this year. It's funny. All these analogies that are always drawn about Tomlin are about disaster.
You know what will be one of the most embarrassing days in football history? Seriously. One of the most embarrassing days in football history will be when that bum goes in the Hall of Fame. And he's gonna.
Real quick, the Goodbranson thing and the Perron thing from the NHL. What'd you think about those two incidents?
I didn't see the Perron thing. What happened?
That was when Larkin got laid out in the middle of the ice.
Oh.
And then he went off after Zub. Is that how you say his name? And then he cross-checked him in the head.
Well, here's the thing. And this applies to the Goodbranson thing as well. When the league does not discipline properly, the players will go in for frontier justice. And I think the league prefers that. So I can't say I like it, but I can't say I'm surprised either.
Any thoughts on Ohtani getting the $700 million? The first one that comes to mind for me is I don't know what worth means anymore, but I question if that's worth it if he's not the pitcher that he was before he got hurt. And coming off the elbow and that being, I think, his second procedure, I doubt that he ever will be.
Well, not only that, Tim, don't forget he doesn't play the outfield no more. He's a DH.
Mm-hmm.
They just paid $700 million for a DH. In terms of pure baseball return, he'll never live up to that contract. Like you said, I don't think he'll ever pitch effectively again. Have you noticed they're very careful to not describe this recent elbow procedure as Tommy John?
Yeah, what do they call it? They came up with something else, didn't they?
It's like an elbow procedure. Well, they cut open his elbow, okay? But the thing is, in terms of him being a phenomenon and what he'll sell, he'll more than justify that contract, don't you think?
Perhaps. I don't know what equates to $700 million, but I get your premise that the ancillary beyond just his 4 at-bats every game will make up the cost. I suppose it could, but I still think they, unless they get many World Series and LCS championships as a result of him playing great and hitting like 330 and 45 home runs, I can't see how it's worth the $700 million.
Tim, if he were from Joplin, Missouri, the fuss wouldn't be half what it is.
Eric says, I genuinely believe there's a realistic chance this team loses out, finishes 7-10. How can that possibility be diminished given what we've seen the last 2 weeks? No, it's entirely possible because I think, the Colts are favored for a reason by about 3 points. I see that being the case, and they're certainly going to get a better version of Browning when he comes up here. The Bengals always play better here than they do in Cincy against Pittsburgh, and then I think they'll be significant underdogs the last 2 weeks, especially if Baltimore has something to play for.
I think they're going to go 9-8, Tim, because the Tomlin team never gives up, and that'll fit the narrative.
Ivan says, about the first thing I agree with, once Tomlin lost the leaders and transformed the culture in the locker room, it started to decline. I'm glad you agree with that, but I think there's a lot else to agree with, and a lot that people have been saying about Tomlin locally, it's starting to manifest now, and there's no way to hide it or run around it.
Yeah, I love how all the defenders of the faith, like Rich Eisen, just well, yeah, they lost to Arizona and New England, but you're still wrong. He's still great.
Yeah, the out of your freaking minds monologue, which he felt the need to backpedal on a little bit. He should, because honestly, it's kind of going the other direction. I think you're out of your minds if you're trying this hard to defend him without acknowledging what the record is pretty much since 2011. You go back to 2012, you go back over the past 10, 11 years, it's not impressive. It's 500, and that's about it.
Tomlin has established himself as that rare sports figure where his results don't matter. He's great just because.
Yeah, you know what? I think part of it literally is, Mark, we can write as many stories as we want to and put in as many facts and put up as many podcasts with as many headlines saying Tomlin's record isn't what people make it out to be. And the national media just doesn't click. They don't listen. They don't read. They don't watch because they don't want to be proven wrong. They don't want to know that they're wrong. And they just want to advance what they've been saying the whole time.
Well, and the bottom line is Mike McCarthy has almost exactly the same record as Tomlin. Some would say a little better. And every time he loses a game, he's under constant fire. And there's a reason for that.
You know what? The Jets guy, for instance. All right, I'll use a New York analogy. With the Yankees finished in last place in the American League East, like, do you really think they're saying in New York, hey, we're spoiled? It's better to be us than the Pirates? No, they're not. They're mad that they finished in last place. The Steelers, who are supposed to be in a higher plane than everybody else, that's the way we present it. They haven't won a playoff game in 7 years. 6 years going on this year being 7.
Well, like I said, I think that McCarthy comparison is really valid. You know, and there's a guy, McCarthy left Green Bay, went to Dallas, and Green Bay did worse, and he did good in Dallas.
Ron says, I say the Pens don't score a powerless play goal again this year. Well, they're at 0 for 37. I think the record mark is 0 for 51. You said on the podcast you've seen some bad Penguins teams during your time watching them since 67. What makes them uniquely bad this year beyond the power play, which we know is dreadful?
Oh, no, the power play. That's it. Tim, if their power play were even average, they'd be in a playoff spot right now.
Oh, yeah. They've got 25 points right now, and there's only 2 teams in the East with fewer. But if the power play had been at least what it was cracked up to be or close, that would be enough to buoy them into a top 8, I would think.
They're not scoring much 5-on-5 either, and it is a rare Penguin team in that they can lean on the goaltending.
Yeah, especially even the backup goaltender has been good, too, in Nedeljkovic for the most part. Not having a losing season in 16 years means nothing. Fire Tomlin, especially when you look at how that 16 seasons was put together. Because, like, as I wrote today, for as historic as this back-to-back set of losses has been against the Cardinals and against the Patriots, like, we've seen this before. We saw this exact routine in 2018, and his collapses have been frequent.
18, 19, and 20. The team collapsed every year. They went from 11-0 to losing 5 of their last 6 in 2020.
Yeah, they get off to mediocre starts. They have horrible finishes, and they rely on whatever happens in the middle to keep them afloat and keep them in contention and keep us talking about him positively like we...
He's a fraud. He won with somebody else's team. Culture, leaders. He's a fraud.
Let's go to Sean. I'm looking forward to seeing Logan Cooley play versus the Penguins Tuesday. Do you guys think he has a chance of Rookie of the Year? No one has a chance but Bedard.
Well, I don't think, unless Bedard gets hurt, I don't think Logan has a chance simply because Bedard has the height machine and Bedard scores a lot. Logan's a better playmaker than Bedard, but Bedard scores a lot of goals.
Yeah, and Logan, I mean, it took him a while to even get his first, right? He wasn't exactly lighting it up when he first got into the league.
Well, he's up to 3 or 4 now, but don't forget, too, he's in Nowheresville, Hockey Town, USA, whereas, Bedard's original 6.
Yeah, my God, I think we might talk about Logan Cooley more here than is being talked about in Arizona. Quite honestly.
I don't know about that. I mean, he's already pretty popular there. His scoring will catch up with the rest of his game, but he's a phenom. Okay, watch when he gets on the half wall on the power play Tuesday night. He's better on the power play as a 19-year-old than anybody the Penguins have.
Jeff says Commanders, Panthers, and Jet fans are talking about getting Tomlin on their fan pages. Please make an offer to someone.
Why would Tomlin agree to go to any of those places, especially Washington and Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, Washington especially. Carolina, I don't know what his relationship was like with Tepper. New York, but it's still a dumpster fire with the way he's managed the team since he's been down there. And the Jets, well, like you said, Mark, I think because they're New York, they'll always figure out a way to get themselves in position to get a quarterback. They keep missing, but they'll try. Hey, you want to talk about quarterback playing competent to the Steelers? How about Wilson yesterday?
He played great.
The boy toy played great.
Don't you think Tomlin's just going to be the coach here next year, though?
Yeah, because as I've always said that, for all the times that we've heard he's never had a losing season, this is going to instantly translate into, well, he's only had one losing season. And I think that starts at the very top.
I don't think he's going to have a losing season. I think he's going to win the next 2 games.
It's with the way things have gone in the NFL, it's possible. And
I think that's just how things go for him. I think the football gods are on his side just enough where he will maintain that winning record.
And I believe they've won 8 in a row now against the Colts. The Colts never play well against Pittsburgh. The Steelers always tend to play well there, too. Major issue with the Pens is that their depth prospects from Wilkes-Barre lack that desperation you usually see from fringe players trying to make an impression. Mark, you made that point in the podcast about, was it Nylander? Is that who you were talking about?
Yeah, Nylander looked like he barely had a pulse, and he's lacked that. He's been up and down, 2 or 3 times this year. I was reminiscing about Bobby Farnham, who had zero talent, but would play like his hair was on fire. Like, would just go out there and go crazy every shift, and I liked it.
David says Colbert has much to do with this team's decline as Tomlin. His drafting was atrocious.
No, he doesn't.
When people say that,
he doesn't. If you think that Colbert had final say at the draft over Tomlin, you're out of your effing mind.
Like, do you really think that out the door, Kevin Colbert said to Mike Tomlin, Mike, I'm giving you Kenny Pickett whether you like it or not? Of course that didn't happen.
That was all Tomlin.
And anybody in that draft, it's not like Tomlin was going to sit back and say, yeah, okay, Kevin, you pick who you want and I'll just take it while you retire. That was just never going to happen. Finally, Mike, do you think he is solely responsible for those drafts? This is a response to the Colbert guy. Tomlin had just as much, if not more, say, especially that last draft Colbert was a part of.
I think Tomlin's had final say in the draft since very early in his tenure.
How was Steve Byrne last night, Mark?
Oh, tremendous. He's always really funny.
Yeah, did he do all of his crowd work stuff, or was this like new material, new set, and all that?
He started and finished with crowd work, and he had new material in the middle.
Was Peter Billingsley there? Did he bring Peter Billingsley with him? From Ralphie from A Christmas Story?
No, he did not.
Oh, okay, because he's with him for the DVE morning show on Friday. I thought they were like doing something in town because he was at Comic-Con. That's what it was. He was at Comic-Con with him.
No. It was Patrick Keane was the opener. He was very funny.
Oh, he's good. Yeah, I've seen him work with Steve before. He's very funny.
Although the funny thing is, and they both riffed on this, it was a Sunday night crowd. Sunday night comedy crowds aren't good.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rare you get a good Sunday night crowd because you get tame people at a Sunday night crowd, and that's not good, especially if you're doing a lot of crowd work. You want some drunk idiots.
You know what I've often wondered? Like every time I go to see Steve, which is fairly often, like it seems like the crowd in the front row has the perfect people for him. Like last night he had, one guy that looked like a character from Die Hard. He had 2 guys who looked like they were part of the January 6th uprising. He had a fat couple in matching Christmas sweaters. And I always kind of wonder what would happen for a guy who does crowd work if like an immaculately coiffed and dressed and behaved crowd showed up one night. What would he do?
Yeah, like a photo shoot from Old Navy just showed up and sat in the front row.
Right. It's like when I saw Steve in Vegas at Kimmel's Comedy Club, there was a lady sitting like to the table next to me who looked like a career meth head. and I'm like, Steve, it's me, Mark from Pittsburgh. Look there. And sure enough, he got around to her.
Mark Madden is on 3 o'clock today, 3 to 6, Monday through Friday, and 105.9 The X. Read him 4 times a week at Trib Live, and check me out Monday through Friday at Breakfast with Benz. We'll catch up with you next week, regularly scheduled episode next week, then we'll figure it out for Christmas after that. This is Madden Benz Unfiltered.